Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Again, we're talking about the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. It's a big topic of conversation across the internet right now. Obviously, having been released around about a year ago with stocks hitting the masses nowadays, we're actually seeing quite a lot of questions come in from consumers, prosumers, as well as professionals about this camera. So in my last video, I talked about the Viltrox adapter for this camera. So I highlighted some of the problems, but also some of the pros about that adapter. I'm going to do a similar thing with the storage media for this camera. Let's start by talking about exactly what storage media this camera can take. It can take a SD UHS Type 2 card, it can take a CFast 2.0 card, or you can plug a USB SSD into the side and record directly onto that. For the larger productions with this camera, you'll be looking at probably using either the CFast or the SSD plugged in via USB. However, for more of the guerrilla, indie, run and gun type footage, you'll be looking to use probably the SD card because they are much cheaper. Now, obviously with the lower price comes less reliability. However, to say I haven't had any issues with my SD card so far. I've been using the Sandisk Extreme Pro. This is a 256GB memory card. It records at 170 megabytes a second and has been absolutely amazing. I've never needed to record any more than that across the few projects that I've done with this camera. So a quick overview of the record formats for this. You can record at 4K DCI, you can record at UHD, or you can record at 1080p. You can record in a variety of frame rates, so up to 120 frames per second in 1080p. You can record up to 60 frames a second in 4K, but most people will probably be shooting around about the 24 to 30 frames a second mark. So if we talk about one of the highest quality settings, so 5:1, so this is, I guess, average raw settings, 4K DCI, you're looking at getting around about 44 minutes with the SD card that I'm using, the 256GB memory card. That is probably going to be the highest record format for most people. I do know this records at Q0. However, I'm actually leaning more towards using the ProRes 422 or ProRes HQ because I'm finding that I'm not really needing for this kind of stuff the Blackmagic RAW. Speaking of Blackmagic RAW, I went through the spec sheet and pulled out a few of the data rates for each of the codecs. So at Q0 you are looking at around about 200 to 210 megabytes a second. That is at 4K DCI Q0 at 30 frames a second. With this memory card in it, you're looking at getting around about 21 minutes of record time. Now that isn't very much at all. However, recording at such a high quality, you'll be finding that that's probably about as long as the battery lasts as well. On the other end of the spectrum, at 12:1 compression, you're only looking at around about 34 megabytes a second, at which case, really? That can't be right. Nah, that's not. According to the datasheet, you're looking at 34 megabytes a second for Blackmagic RAW, 12:1 compression at 4K DCI, 30 frames a second. Now with this card in there, that's around about 125 minutes of recording. That's 256GB, more or less. Probably, I think it was 255 when I worked it out. So then if we look at ProRes 422, you are looking at around about 120, 110 megabytes a second, which will give you roughly 36 minutes of record time on this card. So over USB-C you can record up to the maximum recordable quality. So you can record at up to 4K DCI, 60 frames a second, straight into USB-C. Obviously then gives you a lot more flexibility when it comes to literally plugging it into your editing device, whether it's a laptop or a PC, Mac, PC, you name it. It gives you a lot more flexibility and speed, meaning you don't have to offload the footage from a memory card if you are wanting to edit straight from that SSD. Okay, so let's talk about the actual utilization of the cards. The issue I think with this camera is there's no redundant storage. If you have 2 or 3 media sources plugged into this camera, whether that is a SD card and a CFast, an SD and a SSD, you cannot record to both at once. I do understand the limitations electronically and physically behind that in terms of the amount of heat dissipation required is probably quite high, the amount of processing power to encode all that footage is also probably quite high. So I do appreciate where that could fall down if they were to put that in this camera. However, I do think that would be quite a nice feature to have. I do understand also that storage media is becoming a lot more reliable. However, With the run and gun style of this camera, if you're using an SD card and you so happen to have a CFast card and you are out shooting, I don't know, a travel video whilst you're away, or you are shooting somebody's wedding quite handheld to make it quite intimate so that people aren't scared by a big camera, then I can understand why you would want that redundant storage for this device. That's not saying it's not super easy to whip the card out, plug it straight into a laptop and back up the footage. It takes around about 20 to 30 minutes to offload around about 256 gigabytes of storage straight onto the internal SSD inside my Mac, or if I were to use something like the Samsung T5 SSD, it takes around about 30 to 40 minutes just because of that bridge between USB 3 and the SD card reader in my MacBook Pro. So like I said, there are lots of different options for you to use when it comes to storage media on this camera. I personally love the fact that I can just pop an SD card into this camera, literally take this out with a lens on, not even with this top handle on, and I am away for about 30 minutes. I could literally go out on a walk with my partner. I could go around to a parent's house and, you know, just record some nice candid footage or get some nice B-roll without having to rig this camera out too much. And that was something that really stood out to me when I bought this camera, was that it was a really nice camera for traveling. It was a really nice camera for run and gun without being really big like a normal cinema camera, whilst also offering many of the same benefits. So to summarize, I would recommend getting a Sandisk Extreme Pro SD card. This is not sponsored obviously, but I would recommend getting one of those for this camera. If you have the extra £100–200, I would definitely suggest getting a CFast card instead. Obviously with that comes the requirement of getting a external CFast reader, which are around about £15–20, so they're not that expensive. However, it's an extra cost that you might not already have if you're using a laptop that already has a built-in SD card reader. When this camera is fully rigged out, I will be using the Samsung T5 SSD as my main source to record to. I say source, that's the wrong way around. I will be using the Samsung T5 SSD to record to in the first instance, purely because of the ease of unplugging it from this device and plugging it straight into my PC using the included secondary USB cable. So my experience with this camera is I will get around about 86 minutes worth of record time just by using the 12:1 B-raw record format on this camera using an SD card. And I've got to say, I've never really needed any more than that in any situation. That is recording mostly at 50 or 60 frames a second as well. So obviously if you then bump it down, you'll find that you actually get more like 120, 130 minutes of record time, and that, I've got to say, is probably enough for most guerrilla filmmakers, most indie filmmakers, or most, I don't know, filmmakers in general that are using this handheld. That is it for this video. If you did like it, don't forget to like, hit subscribe, like the bell so you don't miss a video every time I upload, and until the next time, peace.